I was a TA for an intro to biology class. During a lab on genetics, a student raised his hand and asked with complete sincerity, if he donated blood, could the person who received it accidentally have a baby that looked like him? He was genuinely worried about having secret children all over the city just from giving blood at the student centre blood drive. It took 3 of us to explain how that was not possible. My freshman year roommate came from a very small rural town. One day, I came back to our dorm room to find him staring intently at the microwave. He had put a can of Campbell's soup inside, not opened, just the sealed metal can. He told me he wanted it to get extra hot from the pressure. I managed to stop him just seconds before he hit start, narrowly avoiding a trip to the ER and a massive bill for a new microwave. In a creative writing class, we had to write a short horror story. One student wrote about being stalked by a vicious man-eating deer. When the professor questioned the premise, the student passionately argued that since deer eat plants, and some plants are used in medicine for humans, then deer are technically eating things that belong to humans, and it wasn't a big leap to them just eating us directly. A girl in my history class confidently argued that World War I was a prequel, and they made World War II because the first one was so popular with audiences. She said it was like a movie franchise, and that the directors, world leaders, wanted to make a bigger, more explosive sequel. The professor was so stunned, he just stood there silently for a full minute before moving on. During a final exam for a basic astronomy course, one of the essay questions was, "Explain the phases of the moon." A student wrote a single sentence, "The moon is shy sometimes." That was it. I was grading the exams and had to show the professor. He laughed so hard he had to leave the room, and he ended up giving the kid 1 point out of 20 for sheer poetic audacity. My sweet mate got his first credit card. He thought the credit limit was the amount of free money the bank gave him each month as a reward for being a customer. He maxed it out in 3 days on a new gaming PC and was genuinely shocked and angry when the bill arrived. He tried to argue with the credit card company that they had tricked him with their fake money gift. We had a fire drill in our dorm at 3 a.m. One guy on our floor came out into the hallway, holding a fire extinguisher, frantically trying to spray his laptop, which was not on fire. When the RA asked what he was doing, he said he was cooling down the motherboard to prevent a fire. He thought fire drills were preventative measures for specific, high-risk electronics in the building. In our dorm's communal kitchen, I watched a girl try to make pasta. She put the dry spaghetti into a pot, poured cold water over it, and then put it on the stove and turned the burner on high. She came back 10 minutes later and was furious that it had turned into a single giant starchy brick. She complained that the pasta was defective and that she was going to sue the company. A student in my public speaking class gave a presentation on the dangers of dihydrogen monoxide. He went on for 10 minutes about how it's in all our food, used in industrial solvents, and is fatal if inhaled. At the end, he triumphantly revealed he was talking about water. The girl next to me whispered, "Wait, so is water safe to drink or not?" She completely missed the point. I had a classmate who insisted that Alaska was an island next to Hawaii. She used the maps in our textbooks as proof, pointing to the little box off the coast of California where Alaska is usually placed. No amount of explaining or showing her a globe could convince her that it was actually connected to Canada. She said the globe was probably just an old version of the world. A guy in my philosophy class argued that if a tree falls in the forest and no one is around to hear it, it does make a sound because the squirrels hear it. When the professor tried to explain that no one in the context of the thought experiment included animals, the student got defensive and said, "You don't know that. Maybe squirrels aren't part of the same reality matrix as us." My lab partner for chemistry seriously asked me if we could just mix all the leftover chemicals from our experiments together at the end of class to make a new element. She thought it worked like mixing paint colours and was disappointed when I told her that we would, at best, create a toxic gas cloud and at worst, blow up a section of the science building. I overheard a student in the library complaining loudly on her phone that she failed her geography exam. Her friend asked what the problem was. She replied, "They asked me to name a country in Europe and I wrote Paris. I don't get it. Isn't that like the most famous one? The professor is just biased against France, I guess." A football player in my literature class had to write an essay on Moby Dick. His entire thesis was that Captain Ahab was the good guy because the whale was a known criminal that was illegally trespassing in his ocean. He referred to the whale as a marine terrorist and said Ahab was just trying to enforce maritime law. He was completely serious about the whole thing. My roommate tried to do his laundry for the first time. Instead of detergent, he poured an entire bottle of Blue Dawn dish soap into the machine. The suds filled the entire laundry room, pouring out of the machine and creating a foam apocalypse. He just stood there and said, "Well, at least I know the clothes will be really, really clean now." During a political science lecture on the 3 branches of government, a student asked the professor which branch the FBI was in. The professor said the executive branch. The student then asked, "Okay, but which one do the men in black work for? Is that like a secret 4th branch?" He was dead serious and seemed confused when everyone started laughing. I worked at the campus IT help desk. A student came in and said her laptop's cup holder was broken. I was confused until she pointed to the CD-DVD tray, which she had been using to hold her coffee while she studied. It had snapped under the weight of her mug. She wanted to know if her warranty covered it. In a nutrition class, the professor was discussing vegetarianism. A girl raised her hand and said she could never be a vegetarian. The professor asked why. She replied, "Because I love chicken, and they aren't even animals, they're birds." The professor just blinked and said, "And what category do birds fall under?" The girl just shrugged. My roommate was convinced that turning all the lights and electronics off in our room would save the internet for later, so it would be faster when he needed to play online games. He would go around unplugging everything, including the router, and then get angry when the Wi-Fi didn't work, blaming me for using up all the data waves. A student in my statistics class argued that a 50% chance of rain on Saturday and a 50% chance of rain on Sunday meant there was a 100% chance of rain that weekend. He was ready to fight the professor on it, insisting that the percentages add up. The professor tried to explain probability, but the student just shook his head and said, "Nah, that's just like your opinion." I had a classmate who was trying to get a refund for our online textbook. Her reasoning, which she emailed to the professor and the entire class, was that since the book was digital, it was made of electricity, and she was afraid of getting electrocuted by reading it during a thunderstorm. She included a link to a Wikipedia article about lightning. My roommate bought a small cactus and was determined to take great care of it. A week later, I saw him in the bathroom carefully washing the cactus with soap and water. He was scrubbing the needles with a toothbrush. He told me it looked dusty and he wanted to make sure it was clean so it could do photosynthesis properly. In an art history class, we were looking at Michelangelo's David. One student asked in all seriousness, "If he's a statue, how did he kill Goliath?" The professor gently explained that David was a biblical figure and the statue was just a depiction. The student then whispered to her friend, "Okay, but how did they get him to hold still for that long?" A guy on my floor decided to cook a frozen pizza, but he was high. He preheated the oven, took the pizza out of the box, unwrapped it from the plastic, and then threw the pizza in the trash and slid the clean, empty cardboard circle into the oven. He only realized his mistake when he smelled the cardboard burning 20 minutes later. A girl in my environmental science class stated that we don't need to worry about recycling plastic because all the plastic eventually goes to the ocean, where the sea turtles eat it and it disappears. She thought this was a natural, symbiotic relationship, and that environmentalists were just trying to starve the turtles. My dorm neighbour bought a fish. A week later, I saw him walking it on a tiny leash he'd made out of string. He was dragging the poor goldfish in its bowl along the sidewalk. He said it needed exercise and a change of scenery, or it would get depressed. The fish, unsurprisingly, did not survive the weekend. In a business ethics class, we were discussing insider trading. One student argued that it should be legal, because it's not fair that some people have secrets and others don't. Making them share the secrets by trading on them just makes the stock market more equal for everyone. He genuinely believed he had solved market inequality. A student in my dorm tried to save money by making his own coffee. He didn't have a coffee maker, so he put hot water from the tap into a mug, added some ground coffee, and then tried to filter it by pouring it through a sock into another mug. He then complained for an hour that his coffee tasted fuzzy and like feet. During a study abroad orientation, the coordinator was explaining currency exchange rates. A student raised her hand and asked if she could just use her American money in Spain. The coordinator said no, she'd need euros. The student then asked, "But what if I tell them it's American? Isn't it, like, better?" She thought the dollar had some kind of universally acknowledged superior value. My roommate was convinced that the moon was a hologram projected by the government. His proof was that you could sometimes see it during the day, which he claimed was a projection glitch. He would point at it and say, "See, they forgot to turn it off this morning." So sloppy. He was writing a paper on it for his sociology class. In a basic computer science class, the professor told us to clear our cache. A student in the front row immediately started pulling loose change out of his pockets and putting it on the desk. He thought the professor said, "Clear your cache," and assumed it was some kind of weird icebreaker activity to show we weren't trying to bribe him for a better grade. A girl I had a class with was notoriously late. One day, the professor told her if she was late again, she'd be dropped from the course. The next day, she walked in 20 minutes late, holding a signed doctor's note. The note excused her from the first 30 minutes of class because of an appointment. She thought a doctor's note could excuse her from being late in the future, like a permission slip. I watched a guy in the dining hall try to get soda from the fountain. He put his cup under the Sprite spigot, but nothing came out. He tried again. Nothing. An employee came over and told him, "Sorry, the CO2 is out." The student looked at the machine, then at the employee, and said with a completely straight face, "It's okay, I don't need the carbon dioxide. I just want the Sprite part." A student athlete in my English class had to give a presentation on Shakespeare. He stood up and confidently announced he would be discussing the famous author William Shakespeare, pronouncing the last name like the French name. He insisted that was the correct pronunciation because it sounds fancier, and he was a fancy old-timey guy. My sweet mate was from a very wealthy family and had never done a chore in his life. He decided to clean the bathroom. I walked in to find him spraying Windex all over the inside of the toilet bowl. He said he figured that since the toilet water was blue, it must be made of the same stuff as the blue window cleaner, and he was just adding more to make it stronger.